Welcome, everyone. I'm Jamie Flinchfall, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have a special guest with us, Mo Rinkunas. Mo, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's great to be here and have this opportunity to chat.
Yeah, it's great to chat. A little introduction about you. You're the Director of Insights Membership at Rock Health Advisory, leading enterprise partnerships across health, tech, and innovation, a space with lots and lots of interesting stuff going on. I have over 20 years of experience spanning corporate innovation, venture studios, advisory leadership at DuPont, Accenture, Dream Adventures, and Redesign Health. So worked with a lot of different teams and a lot of creative spaces, a lot of innovative spaces, and that's gives us plenty to talk about today. So I kind of want to start there. You've worked with a lot of different teams, whether as in the advisory space or the venture space or your own team. Um, so as you engage with these teams and groups, how do you evaluate their capabilities to go do the tough problem solving or innovation or creativity work that they need to go do?
Yeah. So I think the one thing is that I really do believe that everybody has capabilities to be excellent problem solvers. And there's evolutionary reasons, right, that we've evolved to be good problem solvers. But everybody has different strengths that help them approach problem solving from a different angle. And so when I'm stepping in to work with a team to help guide them through that process, I always really like to take that step back and understand, what are folks' styles? What are their strengths? And so, like you kind of look at opposite ends of the spectrum, right? It's fantastic to have people who are incredibly positive and are always looking on the bright side because those are the cheerleaders who are going to bring that energy to the room when you're trying to get as many post-its on the wall, encourage people to keep going. Anything's possible. And then on the complete opposite end, right? There's the folks who are, pretty pessimistic. They're good at saying these are all the reasons that idea that won't work. And I want to tap into that skill set when we need to start narrowing it down and we need to, walk away from a session and say, hey, we've come to a clear decision about, the potential solution that we want to test and that we want to move forward. So I think, you tapping into those skill sets, understanding what everyone is going to bring into the mix so that you can leverage the different strengths in a way that creates a good environment for brainstorming, for problem solving.
That's great. So I'm going to compare that to some of how I've approached things. And I don't really work with teams very much anymore. I'm kind of a one-on-one advisor these days. But, not many people would call me lazy, but I kind of will say in this case, I would take a lazy approach, which is let me just design my engagement with a team, assuming there's lots of variation in those capabilities and styles and personalities in the team. And then I don't really know what they all are. I don't need the inventory. Um, what are the extra benefits of really having that inventory? And are you really managing the individual at that point and how to get the most out of the individual, or are you looking for the conflicts between different styles? Like, how do you actually deploy that knowledge once you have that inventory?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the benefits, I get it. And I've definitely, sometimes you're like, hey, I don't have time to kind of do an individual sit down with every team member. I'm dividing the session. If I know there's going to be a diverse set of opinions, you can plan for that and you're going to be successful. I 100% agree. But I think when you are able and have that time to kind of understand the individual strengths people are bringing, one, it's a great opportunity to say, can I tailor those roles so that people are incredibly invested in this workshop that we're going to do together, in the work that we're going to do together, in a way that you can't if you can't necessarily tap into those strengths. And so, like I always tell folks, right, like you don't necessarily want to hear me facilitate and run the whole thing for a whole day, a half day, however long we're getting together. So let me tap in folks that, are good at driving that ideation or good at driving to the execution piece and what do we need to do next. And so bring them into the process in that way because you can tap into their strengths. And then I think you mentioned something else that is incredibly important, which is to kind of understand where could the roadblocks be. And that might be just internally, where do you think people are going to get stuck? I've worked with a lot of really fantastic innovators who have a strong science or engineering background. And, and so I think a lot about, what is going to resonate with them in terms of this process? Where are they going to get stuck? And so kind of thinking about where those roadblocks might be for individuals is important, and then understanding where you might have those team dynamics or those conflicts that come up in the team. You can't always avoid that conflict, and actually that conflict can sometimes be very healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Raises things that we haven't necessarily thought of before, but just kind of knowing where that might be as someone who sort of helps facilitate that process of coming to a decision point, of coming to a solution, can be incredibly helpful so that you kind of have a plan ahead of time. If you bump into that, how are you going to address it?
Yeah, I like that a lot. So coming back to that, everyone has different capabilities, has problem solving capabilities, but they are different. That kind of brings us around to collaboration, where 1 + 1 = 3. I like to call problem solving, innovation, creativity a contact team sport. So whether it's tips and techniques or mindset and approach, how do you think about collaboration and ensuring it's as messy as it needs to be in order to produce the results you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I am a firm believer, right, that like, like the part of the value of this process is that you're doing all the messy parts up front to hopefully have smoother sailing later down the road once you've picked your path. But it's hard to have that messiness exist if the team that is coming together doesn't have trust and doesn't feel like they have that psychological safety to put ideas out there that are unproven, to kind of be maybe a little bit more unconventional or creative than they typically are. And I often view that when you're working with teams, you have to build trust up over time, and then it becomes this kind of bank that you can take a cash check against, right? As you need to. So, then when you're saying we're going to, we have this trust, now we're putting you into an uncomfortable situation to perhaps ask you to really stretch, come up with new ideas, try things that are different. When you have that trust in place, you're able to do that. I think, I have many times been in situations where, an organization, a team has been dealing with really tough times, and that's eroded a lot of the trust. People are worried, like, am I going to get my paycheck next month? Like, what does this all look like?
Mhm.
And then someone has the idea of like, well, we should get everybody together and brainstorm ways to save money, or we should brainstorm ways to make more money. And then they wonder why people aren't really coming up with new or innovative ways to do that. And it's because that trust has been eroded and that psychological safety has been removed. So I think, the work that you can do to build that up in advance so that even if you're in that kind of tough situation, you can draw on some of that. And I think a lot of that trust comes from showing people in real world settings that it is okay to take risks. I remember years ago we were talking about this when I was at DuPont, and this idea of a dead projects day came up. So for Day of the Dead, we were going to get everybody together and share their projects that failed. And people are like, nobody is going to share their project because nobody wants to admit things that haven't failed. And so we were very intentional. We got leaders at the highest level to commit to share their failed projects, and now I've seen I've kept up with the team over the years. They still do this. It's become sort of an institution there, and they get together at least once a year to share those failed projects. But people now kind of see it's okay to try something and not have it work. And it builds that trust. And they're able to draw on that to help their teams be more creative and innovative when they're trying to solve problems.
Yeah. That psychological safety, is so key, and it shows up parallel to professional safety and of course physical safety as well. Um, I don't know if it's a strategic question or a tactical question, but what do you do about trying to build that psychological safety when the source of tearing down psychological safety comes from outside the room, meaning you don't have control over it? There's a source of lack of psychological safety out there that's affecting people, but you're trying to have them have psychological safety inside the room. How do you think about balancing that challenge?
Yeah, I talk a lot about the role that innovation leaders have to play on their team. And I constantly describe it as being that snowplow. So I think a lot of times when you are fortunate enough to be, kind of at the helm of a team, it's your job to say, how can I clear the path for my innovators to do their best work, to come up with creative solutions, to really drive this forward. And so, that means doing a lot of work outside of, the brainstorming glass walls and post-it notes to kind of think about, what do I need to do from navigating the politics that exists within an organization? How do I, effectively communicate to the most senior levels of leadership to create space and help them understand that innovative projects will likely look different than other projects that are sort of on their dashboard. The metrics that we're able to report out, the kind of, results that we're going to measure ourselves against will look different. So helping clear that path. And sometimes, honestly, saying like, hey, there's some places where I need to go do hand-to-hand combat. And, I've been at organizations where, there have been functions which for good reason are kind of set to put those guardrails in place. Their job is often to say no. Like if you kind of proactively go out, have conversations with those folks, help them understand the work that you're trying to do, you can really effectively be that snowplow, clear some of the hurdles. Not all of them, but then when your team knows that you're really out there clearing that path for them, they at least feel that like within the confines of their team, this is a safe place.
Mhm.
And they can do their best work and they can share. And you can never eliminate all of the
No.
perils that exist, right? But you can at least help folks feel like you are their best champion and that you're going to kind of fight to help them be successful.
Yeah, I think that's fair because I mean, you could say, well, what about outside the company and what's going on in the world and what's the point of any of this, right? So at some point we have to choose to focus on the parts we can engage in. So let me move to learning a little bit. A lot of what you're talking about with innovation, you're headed in a new space. You may not know the feasibility, you may not know the robustness or the optimal path. How do you approach learning and discovery in those types of processes around innovation and problem solving?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I'm a firm believer that, when we're coming up with solutions, right, you're coming up with not the final end solution that's going to solve everything for you, but you're coming up with that minimal viable solution that you can go out and test. And, to me, a great workshop means that, we've gotten to a couple potential solutions and we've had that discussion of what must be true for this to be the right path that we want to go forward. And I think when you start to kind of identify those what must be truths for those solutions, the path then to what can we go out and test? What can we very quickly learn becomes really obvious in many cases. And so, it's never feeling 100% confident that, okay, this is the path and we've committed to it, but it's saying, hey, we know that we can go out and in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever the right cadence is for your organization, we can set that time to say, we're going to come back together and share what we learned. We have a very clear path. A number of places where I've worked, we actually called them learning plans. And so we would leave that meeting with a learning plan. Here's the what must be true. Here's the test we're going to do. And here's the metrics that we're going to use to evaluate the results of the test. We're committing to complete it by this date. And so I think, that's an important part of this process, because people don't feel like I'm getting together to share ideas and I don't really know what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Your folks are like leaving with clear action items. And most of the time, the solution that you land on will pivot because of what you'll learn in those tests that you do. But you walk away with a lot more confidence and are able to better position those solutions than in the larger organization, because you can point to the data that you've gathered along the way.
Yeah. Walk me through a little bit so test to learn is a core skill to me in problem solving, and write about it in the book. And but especially when you're coming up with new products, new programs, or even new businesses, some of that testing to learn is very complex, meaning you're in this giant ecosystem called the marketplace, and so you can never reach full certainty. So how do you think about designing a good test to learn that's practical, right? That people can pull off, because we can't go build an entire business and then see if it works or not. That's not really test to learn. And then where does that intersect we'll never have supreme confidence. So how much confidence do we need in order to move forward?
Yeah. No, so I think actually like a good way to back into this is to say, if we're getting together 6 weeks from now, and the goal of that meeting is to say, do we continue down this path? Do we pivot that path, or do we stop? What information will we need to make that decision to say that we're going to go, let's just say, another 6 weeks down the path. And I think when you're like very discreet and you say, hey, we're looking at this in 6 week increments, 2 month increments, whatever the right kind of speed for your organization is, it helps people then think about, okay, I don't need absolute certainty, but here's what I would really like to know. And here's how I would really feel comfortable making that next decision point. And so then it becomes, it's like, okay, if we talk to 10 of our potential customers between now and the next time we come back together, and 8 out of 10 of them express X, Y, and Z, now we have something clear that we can move forward. Would we love to talk to 100 customers? Of course. But, most of the time, folks are working on these projects in the mix of a number of other responsibilities. So, so that's the other thing you do. It's like, what's reasonable? You want to set people up for success. Can they, really achieve that learning plan? But, I think if folks kind of leave the room feeling like, yes, if you come back to me and you can demonstrate that learning, or learn something new, then we can make the next decision. And that's really, I realize I'm oversimplifying it, and often a lot of creativity goes into saying, like, how can we test this, and what is the best way to learn? And we could probably talk for hours on that subject alone. But I think when you frame it in people's minds of like, what do you need to just be able to take the next step, not to go the whole journey, but just to take the next step.
Yep. No, I like that next step mindset. So just to kind of wrap up, I think people would be really interested in your domain perspective. If you were talking to a group of entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs or innovative product managers, what are some of the areas in your domain that are just ripe for innovation? They're just waiting for innovation. They're ripe for disruption. What are some vectors or segments that you see a lot of change headed our way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, luckily for me, I'm currently spending most of my time in the healthcare space, and we, as a space, there are just so many pressures I think that, we look at the fact that, we're not sure how the healthcare industry is going to staff itself in the long term. Will we have enough people to provide the care that people need? Obviously, affordability of care, continues to be a challenge. If you're operating in the US, incredibly complicated, but even in other countries, right? How do we make sure that people can have access and in an affordable way to the care? So I mean, I think there's very much big picture challenges. And so if you want to tackle one of those, then I would be delighted to hear what you're thinking. But I think even within that, there's a lot of opportunity also to look at the fact that a lot of innovators in healthcare are driving point solutions forward. But when we think about how most of us experience healthcare, how we should experience healthcare, we are integrated systems, and we should be experiencing that in an integrated way. And so I think there's a huge amount of opportunity for folks who want to look at how to make those connections between some of the kind of the point solutions, the point innovations that are coming, and think about how we can have more holistic, integrated healthcare. So lots of opportunity there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, well, thanks for sharing your perspectives, your experiences, and I'm sure our listeners will benefit. And good luck to you and your organization.
Thanks so much, Jamie.